Hi, this is David Shoemaker, and I'd like to welcome you to Living Thelema. Now, if you've been listening to my previous podcasts, there's no doubt you've noted that a lot of the material I presented has touched on the various aspects of the AA curriculum. There have been episodes focusing on some of the ritual foundations. There have been episodes on meditation and pranayama. Certainly the important episodes dealing in one way or another with true will or the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. But what I'm going to attempt to do here in this episode and in the next episode as a two-part series is to weave together these disparate parts of the AA training system in such a way that when I'm done, I hope you will have a better sense of why these tasks and tools and methods are arranged the way they are, why they unfold in a certain manner across the outer order grades, the GD grades of AA, why they lead you towards knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. Because there is a technology here. There is a real technology that tends to get talked about in terms of a grade-by-grade analysis of, here's what you're doing in Malkuth and why that's, Earth-related, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll touch on that, but I want to get beyond that a little bit and maybe shift focus so that we're talking about the work of AA in terms of the type of training that's occurring along the way. Now, the way I'm going to discuss this is that I've broken down the work of the AA below Tefereth into 5 training tracks, essentially 5 sets of different tools, different kinds of tools that are going to work together to bring you towards knowledge and conversation. Now, these 5 tracks unfold concurrently across the first order grades. This isn't going to be, primarily, this isn't going to be a matter of, one track going with each grade. That's what I'm trying to get away from a little bit in this way of discussing the tasks. So let me list out these 5 tracks as I'm presenting them, and then I'll go into detail about each one of them one at a time, and we'll do that over the course of this episode and the next. So the 5 training tracks are track 1, what I'm calling the development of magical skills and techniques. Track 2 is the training of the mind to focus, to empty, to become and remain receptive. Track 3 is stimulation and activation of chakras and the raising of Kundalini. Track 4 is the devotional practices, the bhakti yoga aspect of the AA training. And track 5 is what I call broadly the balancing of the psychomagical constitution. And believe me, I'll go into a lot more detail about these, but I just wanted to list them out for you first, and then we'll take them one by one. So before I start with the breakdown of these, I want to reemphasize that it's really impossible to overemphasize the fact that everything you do in the AA below Tefereth, everything leading up to the 5-6 grade of Adeptus Minor is devoted solely to the accomplishment of the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. It is so easy to get distracted from this because of the diverse nature of all the tasks that are assigned, because of the many traditions that are woven together, because of everyone's individual predilections and biases and favorite things to do. It's easy to get to fall into a rabbit hole and not get the big picture that the whole point is, as I said on an earlier podcast, not to be the most powerful magician in the world, but to be yourself, to attain to the knowledge and conversation, to discover thereby with certainty and power your true will and begin to carry it out. So let's look at the tracks one by one. Track 1, again, is the development of magical skill and technique. Now, this is going to be worked on from the very earliest stages of the AA, as early as probationer. The probationer is very likely to be experimenting with pretty much a full spectrum of magical techniques, basic ritual forms such as pentagram and hexagram rituals. But by the time, assuming there's a passage to neophyte and the probationer year is survived, there's going to be quite a bit of specific emphasis in neophyte on these classic ritual forms. It's like learning an alphabet. You just have to get this stuff down and let it form a foundation for everything you do after. So again, pentagram and hexagram forms, lesser and greater, supreme, etc. The neophyte's going to be developing competence with elemental, planetary, and zodiacal rituals, really making an astral atlas, so to speak. There may be experimentation with Enochian, although that's specifically assigned later at the practicus level. Classic Solomonic and Goetic techniques. Now, as you may know, what's essentially happening here by design, in terms of the way Crowley set up the system, is that much of the traditional instruction that would have occurred in the Golden Dawn Second Order is being handed to the neophyte pretty much right out of the gate, with only the preparation of probationer behind them. So, these skills are really drilled in from the very beginning of the system. But why? And that's the question I'm going to ask over and over at each stage of these talks. Looking at each track, we're going to over and over again ask, why here? Why now? What's the point of training this? It may not be immediately obvious why knowing how to do a pentagram or hexagram ritual correctly, or any of these other techniques is necessarily at all related to the knowledge and conversation. Well, think about it this way. If you can't design a ritual to effectively bring in just a fundamental aspect of nature, like a particular element or a particular planetary influence, if you can't competently design and execute a ritual like that, and to make yourself an adequate vessel for the invocation and channeling and direction of a particular force that is as foundational as one of these that I've listed here, how in the world can you design the biggest ritual of your life, the ultimate ritual of invocation of your own holy guardian angel, if you don't have down these basics? So an individual style of ritual, learning a classic pentagram or hexagram ritual form in itself is really inconsequential. But as a tool for developing your capacity to invoke, maintain, safely contain, and direct magical force, it's invaluable. So that's why. And of course, all these physical rituals, have a Malkuth correspondence as well. Now, also at neophyte, this is still track 1 in terms of the development of magical skills and techniques. Also at neophyte, we have the aspirant tested on mastery of the astral plane. Essentially some scrying techniques, being tested with an unknown symbol, and proving that you have developed adequate facility with the body of light in order to have sensitivity to these astral realms. Now, why? Well, as I've touched on a couple places, your ability to speak the language of symbol, which is the nature of the astral world, the nature of mind itself, is directly related to your building capacity to receive consciously the impulses and communications from the Holy Guardian Angel. While initially in the path of the aspirant, these impulses will likely be more or less subconscious, speaking through dreams and intuition and intuitive flashes of various kinds. The more consciously you can speak and understand this language, the closer you are drawing near towards conscious communication with the angel at will, which is pretty much the definition of knowledge and conversation. So that's the continuing work of track 1 at Neophyte in terms of the astral plane, and that's why it's there. Now the practicus moves on to do some work with divination. Again, why? What's the point of this? How is divination at all connected to knowledge and conversation? So you can effectively get a reading from a tarot deck or the I Ching. So what? What does that do? Well, think about what divination is. Divination is, again, a form of you tuning in the conscious mind to receive subtle impressions from a set of symbols. And I reiterate, if you can't sit down with a set of simple universal symbols like the tarot or the I Ching and get something meaningful out of it, how can you possibly hope to tune into the very, very subtle impressions that will be coming to you at this stage of training from the Holy Guardian Angel? How can you build that kind of radar with that level of sensitivity if you can't do something more fundamental and basic, just like reading a tarot reading? So that's why you build the capacity of the conscious mind to be receptive to subtle impressions from subconsciousness and from symbol sets. The Philosophus begins to work and should master evocation and working with talismans. Okay, why? How is this leading towards knowledge and conversation? Well, evocation, think about what evocation is. Evocation is the ability to externalize magical force particularized to a specific type of energy that is of your choosing. A particular spirit that you want to appear in a triangle is going to be a condensation, a manifestation, an externalization of a specific idea, force, concept. Whether you see it as psychological or whether you see it as an actual external entity, you've still got to have something concrete in front of you that you're interacting with. Now this is strengthening the muscles that will allow you to interact most compellingly and vibrantly and effectively with the Holy Guardian Angel when the time is right. I'm not saying that the nature of knowledge and conversation will be exactly the same as if you're just talking to a spirit of, your average goetic spirit that you've evoked into a triangle. But I am saying that the muscles that are trained by perfecting the skills of evocation will be directly applicable to the eventual knowledge and conversation working. Furthermore, talismans are here to be worked with for a very specific reason related to knowledge and conversation, and that is related to the nature of a talisman. This is a physical object that is imbued with a specific force of your determination. If you can competently design and consecrate a talisman so that you have become a channel of a specific force into a specific object that can hold that power and be of use to you, well, there's a muscle that's going to be useful with knowledge and conversation, because what are you if not a talisman of the force of your angel? Your entire life, your very being, not just your physical body, but your very ongoing living process is a talisman of the nature of your angel, of the voice of your angel, which is your true will. So if you can't imbue a talisman with a specific force, like, hey, I want to make a Mercury talisman, if you can't do that, how can you possibly make your entire being consciously a talisman of the influence of your angel? So again, it's here for a reason. These training tools are not just a grab bag of classical techniques. So that's track one, the development of magical skills and techniques. And I think you can see from the way I've talked through these that they really do each contribute something very specific towards knowledge and conversation. These muscles are being developed in a very planful way in this system. So let's move on to track two, which is the training of the mind to focus, to empty, to become and remain receptive. You might add to expand to that list. Now, here's another set of tasks that's very likely to be experimented with from the beginning, from probationer. While you can pretty much pick whatever you like as a probationer, it's very common to, and important, I think, to have some exposure to the basics of asana and dharana concentration practices. And dharana is what I want to focus on here, that even the probationer is beginning to develop skill in stilling the mind, focusing the mind, allowing the mind to become and remain receptive to the subtle impressions through reflective meditations, where you might be honing your skill at deepening your understanding of important Thelemic concepts, study of holy books, trying to deepen and broaden your mind's ability to grasp these subtle ideas. And why is this here? Why is this so important from the beginning? Well, perhaps this one's pretty self-evident. If you can't get your mind to be quiet, if you can't still the flurry of everyday thought and allow your mind to become receptive to subtle impulses, for something as simple as meditating on a verse from the Book of the Law, or attempting to hold your concentration on a red triangle, if you can't do that, how can you possibly get your mind to be still enough and free from workaday concerns and all of that for the ultimate meditation on the knowledge and conversation? It's an essential muscle, and it's got to be there. The practices of meditation continue, of course, across the GD grades, climaxing with Dominus Luminous. This happens in stages, but as I've touched on before, you have Liber Turis, for example, practiced in the Practicus and Philosophus grades. So that's the one where you're practicing the destruction of thought at its point of origin in the brain. Liber Yod for the Dominus Luminous is literally bringing everything to a point, the Yod point, the point of single-minded, focused intensity. And, of course, all of this is here in these grades as you're sort of rounding the bend up to Ferreth across the Philosophus grade. All of this is here and entirely consistent with the aim of the Dominus Luminous, to harmonize all that has gone before, to aim with one-pointedness to the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. And again, fairly self-evident, if you can't get your mind to focus without distraction on a single point, if you can't bring all of yourself, all that you have found yourself to be, to a point, like as Crowley describes in one place or another, the idea of the additive nature of the vectors of force coming together, and instead of all of these disparate forces kind of aiming out in 12 different directions, you've got all that you are aimed in one direction. That's the essential nature of the Dominus Luminous grade, and the muscles of accomplishing that are trained by these practices here in Track 2, the training of the mind. Finally, also in Track 2, we have the practices of Liber Jugorum, and these are control practices, control of thought, word, and deed, essentially. The Practicus is attempting to control speech, the Philosophus action, and the Dominus Luminous thought. If you can't control your speech in your everyday physical life on the planet, can you make the most perfect invocation for your angel? No. If you can't control action in your everyday life, simple, mundane life, can you control your action in making the perfect ritual to invoke your angel? No. if you can't control thought in your everyday life, if you can't keep yourself away from a particular kind of thought or draw yourself toward another kind of thought in everyday life, can you, at that supreme moment of focus, direct all that attention one-pointedly to the Holy Guardian Angel? No. So the control practices of Liber Jugorum are more essential muscles here. Okay, so that's track 2, the training of the mind. And I'm going to stop here for this episode and continue with the other 3 tracks on the next episode. That'll be the stimulation of the chakras and the raising of Kundalini, the devotional practices, and the balancing of the psychomagical constitution. That'll take us up through knowledge and conversation. And then at that point, I'm going to attempt to describe the path of the adept across the RC grades in terms of what they do with that knowledge of true will, how that path is walked, how the life is transformed, how consciousness is transformed across the RC grades, and up to the attainment of the 8=3 grade of Magister Templi. So hopefully that will be a little carrot for you to come back next month and hear part 2. I hope you've enjoyed some of the discussion today. As always, if you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them at livingthelema@me.com for email, or on the Facebook page of Living Thelema. Also, please visit livingthelema.com for resources and my bio if you're interested. Thanks very much for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Hi, this is David Shoemaker. Welcome to Living Thelema. Today's segment is going to be part 2 of our 2-part series on the methods and tools of AA. Now, this is definitely one of those segments where, to get the most out of it, you're certainly going to want to go back and listen to part 1. I did a lot of setup and preparation for the topics we're going to be talking about in both of these segments, and it's really going to be hard to get the most out of it unless you go listen to part 1. So please do that first, and then come back and listen to this segment. Now, you'll recall that the main point of what I'm discussing here is to not simply do a grade-by-grade analysis of what you're doing in the first order grades of AA and beyond, but more specifically to look at the type of training that is occurring. So as you recall, I have 5 training tracks, and in the last segment we did the first 2 of these. That would be the development of magical skills and techniques as track 1, and the training of the mind to focus, to empty, to become and remain receptive. That was track 2. In this segment, we're going to cover the remaining tracks, 3, 4, and 5. Track 3 is the stimulation and activation of the chakras and the raising of Kundalini. Track 4 is the devotional or bhakti aspects of the training. And track 5 is the balancing of the psychomagical constitution, as I'm calling it. Now, another important point to call to your mind again here is that all of these training tracks are aimed with one-pointedness at the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angels. So the underlying theme here, again, is going to be, why do we do these? Why do they help with knowledge and conversation when the time comes? So that's the frame we're putting around all of this. So let's dig right into track 3, the stimulation and or activation of chakras and the raising of Kundalini. Now, these are terms that are used in a lot of different ways by a lot of different people, and I think I should probably define these terms the way I'm using them today. Basically, I am simply positing that there is a life force resident in each person, which I am terming Kundalini, and that through various practices, this life force can be intensified and applied in specific targeted ways to a transformational process in the body, in the mind, and in the subtle energy centers with which we work. Now, the training in this track begins, like many of the other techniques we've discussed here, as early as probation or for many aspirants. Many probationers are going to be working with asana, the holding of still postures in the body. The testing on that is not done until Zelator, where one must sit perfectly still in front of one's superior for a full hour before being passed. when there's sufficient facility with posture, it's appropriate to begin experimenting with pranayama. And this also may start as early as probationer, but it's not tested as such until zealoter. One of the interesting things you might note about the testing expected of the zealoter in terms of pranayama is that the results that are being looked for here in terms of the fine perspiration and automatic rigidity are really symptoms of Kundalini arousal and action. Just the beginning stages, it gets a lot more intense, but it's evident that even at the level of zealoter, the work that is being done is getting the flow of energy intensified, and you're starting to see some concrete results from this. Now, this is intensified manyfold, in my opinion, with the SSS practices out of Liber HHH, which are assigned to the practicus. This is a practice I've discussed on the podcast before, and it's the one where you are moving the energy between the base of the spine and the brain and conceiving of these opposite poles as being Nuit and Hadit, and building up this sort of this courtship between the two ends of your spine and slamming them together in ecstasy. And this is a beautiful exercise that really takes the Track 3 training to a new level at practicus. And then, of course, all along, magical practices where you are bringing in magical force, controlling it, embodying it in a sense, being a vessel for it, and then directing it in a targeted way. All of those things are exercising the muscles of containment and direction of magical force in the aspirant. So even though it might not seem like doing a magical ritual is Kundalini work per se, as we've described it, it really is, in the sense that you are building yourself up as a battery and targeting mechanism for this energy. And now, of course, the question I've been asking at every stage here: why bother to do this? What's the purpose of doing Kundalini work in the AA system? Well, it's a bit like the life force that we're calling Kundalini is a fuel that potentiates all of the transformations that we're trying to undertake here. All of the willed transformations of self are given more power and more potency via this energy being raised and applied in a directed and willed manner. Additionally, and very importantly, the ecstasy that occurs when these essentially tantric processes of raising the Kundalini force are brought to their conclusion. This divine ecstasy is in itself transformative, healing, evolutionary. You might remember that the subtitle of Gopi Krishna's important work on Kundalini is The Evolutionary Energy in Man. And that's literal, in my view. The energy here is ready to potentiate transformation of the human into the more than human in the direction that we will. And the experience of divine ecstasy is so important in the path towards knowledge and conversation that it can't be overstated. By the time we have done this work in the first order of AA, this transformation should be so acute and so vivid that it's quite simply the case that God, the idea of God, the idea of our HGA is the sexiest thing we can imagine, and that sex is the holiest thing we can imagine and experience. These transformations of our very conceptions and experiences of self, life force, sexuality as an embodiment of life force are pivotal in the progress towards knowledge and conversation. So that's why Track 3 exists. Now, let's move on to Track 4, which is the devotional and bhakti practices. You'll probably recall that the term bhakti itself means devotion, and when we speak of bhakti yoga, we're speaking of the yoga of devotion. And while this is particularly assigned to the Philosophus in the Netzach grade, the aspiration, the devotion, the fire, the passion for the path itself, and the progress toward the union with the angel has been felt all along, I suspect, by everyone on the path, and it's highly unlikely that someone would even arrive at the Philosophus grade. In fact, it's impossible for me to imagine that anyone would arrive at that station on the path without having been fueled by quite a bit of devotion and aspiration all along. When you were first called to this work, no matter how far in the past or how recently that might have been, I'm sure as you reflect back on it, you can see that there was an element of devotion and aspiration that was calling to you, however you understood that at the time. So this aspect of the path, the devotional aspect, has been there from the beginning. All beauty, all truth and beauty that calls to us, that is the mystery that we reach for, is that the siren song that calls us onward. All of that is one or another aspect of the Holy Guardian Angel active in your life and consciousness. All of these experiences are glimmers of the angel to help you write your course toward the angel. When Joseph Campbell says, follow your bliss, he's not kidding. This is a process of discovering what makes you come alive, what makes you love, what makes you continue ever reaching for the next mystery before you, behind the next veil before you. These muscles of devotion and aspiration are cultivated most pointedly, as I said, in the grade of Philosophus, which corresponds to Netzach. And of course, this grade is the one you're hitting just as you're rounding the bend toward Tefereth. And it's the climactic elemental grade of the First Order. And right at this moment, when you are nearly ready to begin the formal working of the knowledge and conversation, this is where you have to really light the fires of aspiration in particular. This is where you have to have all of the muscles of devotion in full bore and fully developed. So you've been working on it all along, but here's where it's really turned up a notch. Now, the key task formally assigned to the Philosophus is Libra Astarte, in terms of a devotional task. And as you may recall, Libra Astarte is a beautifully written work of Crowley's where he's describing the process of creating essentially your own religious system devoted to a particular deity of your choice. And the point here, as is made very clear in Libra Astarte itself, is not that you are having to permanently consider yourself a devotee of some particular god that you've chosen, but that in order to strengthen the muscles of devotion and here it is again, the divine ecstasy that arises out of this devotion, you got to practice with something. If you don't, at this point you supposedly don't have full conscious union with the angels, so you develop a religious system, a system of worship, a system of rituals and other devotional practices that are aimed at some other deity of your choice, all to strengthen the muscles that you will eventually, and not very far in the future probably, be using for the formal knowledge and conversation working. So now let's turn our attention to track 5, which is the balancing of the psychomagical constitution. I also think of this as preparing ourselves as a grail for the indwelling of the light of the angel. And the reason this metaphor really works for me is that if a grail designed to contain, a metaphorical liquid here, is lopsided, it will tip over. If it's got a hole in it, it will leak. If it's made of the wrong material, it will crumble. And in other words, if it's not properly constructed in a balanced and suitable way, it's not going to function as it should. So throughout the first order grades of AA, the aspirant has been endeavoring in many, many ways to fashion themselves as a balanced and suitably constructed vehicle. One of the ways this is symbolized across the grades is in the construction of the elemental weapons, which correspond to the four elements of earth, water, fire, and air. And they also correspond to, of course, to the grades between Malkuth and Netzach. And they also, by another way of reckoning, correspond to the four functions that Jung describes in the psyche, the sensing, feeling, thinking, and intuition. And I attribute them like this, that the pentacle is the weapon of earth and Malkuth and sensation. The dagger is the weapon of air and Yesod and intuition, remembering that spiritual intuition often first manifests through the subconscious, attributed to Yesod. The cup is the weapon of water and of Hod and thinking. And the wand is the weapon of fire and Netzach and feeling, of aspiration and desire. Additionally, at Dominus Liminus grade, the magic lamp is constructed as a symbol of the crowning spirit over the other four elements. So all of these things, the four elements or the four functions of the psyche, the four weapons, they all represent balanced development of psychomagical constitution in such a way that we become a suitable vessel for the indwelling of the angel. As I've said on a previous podcast, the model is a lot like that of a lightning rod, where if you construct it correctly, lightning strikes it. The appropriate form draws the desired force. The force will only come if the form is appropriate. So given that way of understanding this process, it's pretty self-evident why track 5 is so crucial to the knowledge and conversation, ultimately, because simply the force will not reside in an improper vessel. So now that I've laid this symbolism of the Grail on you, I'm going to switch gears and give you an entirely different symbol, but I think one that also teaches us a lot about the nature of the work. If you think of the entirety of the first order grades of AA as the construction of the lamp, I've already mentioned the lamp is attributed to the Dominus Liminus grade, but let's think about this in a slightly different way. Through processes of transformation of the physical body, transformation of the life that we're living, those Malkuthi sort of aspects of things, we have constructed the physical components of the lamp, the structure of ourselves as a lamp. We have pursued Kundalini practices that form the oil that is in the lamp, the fuel for the lamp, through the right use of our intellect and our mind generally. We have chosen the right patterns with which to construct ourselves as this lamp. With the aspiration and the devotion and the desire of Netzach and of the track 4 practices, we have provided a spark that can light the lamp. So do you see how all of these things must be there in order for the process to work, and how each of these 5 tracks contributes something indispensable in making us, at the end of the first order process, a perfectly constructed lamp of light awaiting the indwelling of the angel. And that's about the best way I can understand and explain the process to you. In the podcast on the Holy Guardian Angel, one of the earliest Living Thelema segments, I went into a lot more detail about the nature of the transformation of consciousness that is happening as knowledge and conversation develops. So you might want to listen or re-listen to that and plug that into this particular juncture in what I'm describing today before we go on. So you've completed the first order grades. You have undertaken some sort of magical retirement and formal working for knowledge and conversation, having properly prepared yourself. Knowledge and conversation results. There is success. You have a very much clarified sense of the true will, your path in life, across incarnations, but certainly in the one you're presently in. And now what do you do? This is kind of an important question. Are you going to have done all of this work, discovered the true will, and then do something else? No, of course not. The whole reason you've been here all along, and the reason you've been striving, is to enact the true will, which you can now, only now, really begin to do with maximum power and clarity, having achieved knowledge and conversation. So the question of what to do next it really answers itself, and that is to undertake the task of transforming all of your life to be a suitable atmosphere in which to enact your true will. I suggest you listen to the podcast I did on the right use of magical power in light of the way this empowerment comes to the Adeptus Minor by virtue of having knowledge of the true will. And this is, in essence, the transformative process that leads to Adeptus Major, the 6=5 grade that is attributed to Geburah. We have to take our knowledge of true will and shape our lives into a perfect environment, as perfect as possible, an environment for its execution. This means casting aside those things which are obstacles to the execution of the will, transforming of our surroundings, our perhaps our relationships, our employment, all sorts of things may be radically changed when we have knowledge of true will and we have to apply that to our choices. With this comes great magical power, as Crowley often discusses in terms of the Adeptus Major grade. And the natural consequence of an adept of this stature pursuing the true will with full magical empowerment is that this person is very likely to develop into, quite naturally, an expert in their field, a well-known or at least vibrantly living example of what a ruach, a mind and soul of this person's particular shape can develop into. They're going to be all that they can be as an incarnate human. They're going to grow into all they can be as an incarnate human. And this is essentially the transformational process leading to the grade of Adeptus Exemptus, which is attributed to Chesed, the 7=4 grade. It flows naturally from all that's gone before, and the Adeptus Exemptus is an example of the fully realized Ruach, the fully realized incarnate human as we understand it in our normal sense of the word. So now you arrive at Adeptus Exemptus. You're incredibly good at what you do. You're doing exactly what you're here to do. For the most part, life unfolds in front of you to make that possible without too much conflict or consternation. There are always exceptions, but and at this point, think about it. What's next? What can you do next to be, more developed as a human? Nothing, according to this model. I mean, there's always more self-knowledge and more growth to pursue in subtle ways, but for the most part, when you've attained to this level, the only thing left to discover is that everything you have been doing is in service. Everything that you have been, everything you are, all of the powers and potencies resident in the execution of your true will are in fact in service to humanity itself, to the universe itself. You have come face to face with the realization that unless you are willing to give up the idea of yourself as some individually empowered entity that is attaining for its own sake, unless you're willing to abandon that false sense of separateness from the universal will which you embody, you can't go further. And it's the clinging to this individual identity that characterizes what Crowley describes as the Black Brothers, the adepts of 7 equals 4 that won't let go of that. But if the adeptus exemptus is willing to abandon these ego trappings and is willing to undertake the further work of the grade, which is one of deep bhakti devotion to the all and to the path of service to the all and the path of loving the all, and the adeptus exemptus is willing to do the further tasks of the grade, which include practices like Liber Oz, Abysmi, and Liber Tisharb, which essentially are functioning as ego mortifications, if you will. In other words, when the adeptus exemptus can fully embrace that their life is nothing but service to the universal life, then it becomes possible to, with enough karmic force behind oneself, to cross the abyss and attain to the grade of 8 equals 3 of Magister Templi. So, obviously, we can't go from probationer to 8 equals 3 without oversimplifying a few things. But I hope that the discussion in this segment and in part 1 have given you a sense of not only the reasons behind the training tracks as they occur in AA, but really the necessity of each successive stage in terms of the natural growth and development of the soul when the techniques of AA are rightly applied. And that was my goal, to kind of illustrate that process. So if you have any questions or comments on this, as always, please send them to me at livingthelema@me.com. Or you may also wish to visit the livingthelema.com website, review my bio if you want more information about my work. As always, I really love to get your comments and suggestions for future segments and your feedback in general. So once again, thanks for listening.